Welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Braccio and I am the chair of the Society of Health Policy Young Professionals, or the Society for short. The Society's mission is to bring health policy professionals together and create networking and professional development opportunities to foster the next generation of health policy leaders. As part of our professional development series, we're excited to host this virtual skills building workshop, Boosting Your Virtual Executive Presence, featuring communications coaches Allison May Rosen and Natalie Monegro of 3D Communications. This meeting is being recorded today, so please be sure to mute your lines when you're not speaking. If you have a question at any point during the presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window to submit your questions. And do this as we go along. We can touch on questions as we go, or if you have any questions at the end, we can address them later on as well. I will ask Natalie and Allison to answer your questions as they come up, and we also have the ability to unmute any attendee if you wanted to ask a question directly. And just a note that we'll be distributing today's slides with everyone after the meeting, as well as a link to the recorded webinar in case you want to rewatch any of it or share it with someone who you think might benefit or be interested in it. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Allison May Rosen to kick us off. Thank you, Allison.
You're welcome. And I have successfully taken myself off mute, I hope, which is the first lesson of the day in these virtual meetings. Thank you. So yes, hello and welcome everybody to this 3D Executive Communications webinar called Boosting Your Virtual Executive Presence. So as Nicole said, my name is Allison Rosen. I work at 3D Executive Communications, and I'm really what we call a communications coach and a content specialist. I came to 3D with now have about 25 years in public relations and public affairs experience. And in fact, I also live and work in Washington, D.C., and used to run the Washington office for a big global public relations agency that focused on health. Before that, I worked in federal and state government and doing sort of public affairs activities.
And I'm Natalie Monegro. I am a communications strategist and content specialist at 3D Communications. Most relevant to this group, my MPH is in health systems and policy from Rutgers University. I have about 10 years plus of experience in health communications, primarily doing messaging and presentation development for large pharmaceutical and biotech companies that are getting ready for FDA. And prior to that, I was a high school chemistry and earth science teacher, which means I have a lot of experience talking to an audience and not really being sure if anything's breaking through.
Yeah, and that's our topic for today, right? This new environment for virtual communications. And Natalie and I talk to a lot of clients about these experiences that they're having now. And it's really given us a front row seat on so many of the challenges that businesses and people are attempting, or that they are facing as they attempt to conduct business in the midst of this global pandemic. And so whether this virtual is the new normal or it's normal for now, what we know is that virtually overnight, COVID-19 has changed everything. Right, so Natalie and I talk all the time about its impact on what's happening with our work stuff and what's happening with our private lives. And we do a lot of research and Googling online just to kind of see the latest trends. And one day we ended up finding this cartoon, which we really think captures the sentiments really well. You have this team that's sitting in their conference room very innocently talking about how far away digital transformation is going to be. And in comes COVID-19. Like a wrecking ball. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But first, one of the rules that we have for almost any one of our communications experience is to make sure we know the audience. And so we're going to be conducting some interactive polls during this workshop today to just touch base with you all and kind of see what you're facing. And so we have our first poll that we are going to field here, and it's all about what your virtual experience has been so far. And I'm going to ask Natalie just to read the questions, and you should see them on your screen now, and there's 4 of them, so you can just respond to those.
Yep, there's 4 questions. So the first one is, since we all began work from home, have you had to help convert an in-person meeting into a virtual one? The second question is, how many virtual meetings a day via Zoom or any other platform is your team holding? Are you using a camera and or requiring teammates to use their cameras? And then the fourth question is, what have you found to be among your greatest challenges in meeting virtually? And there's a couple options there.
Yeah, that's good. So we'll give you a couple more seconds just to answer some of these. And it's cool. I don't know how many of you have used this polling feature in Zoom before, but on our end, we see your responses coming in real time, which is very exciting because we know you're out there. We'll just have a couple more seconds. Okay, why don't we publish those results? Okay, so it sounds like most of you have actually had to convert a large in-person meeting to a virtual one. So that's great. And one of the things we're going to be talking about today. And it does sounds like a lot of you are having a fair number of virtual meetings every day. 7 or more is a lot. Maybe just one of you are doing that, but yeah, I mean, Natalie and I feel the same way. And actually we've coined a new term, Zoom fatigue syndrome. So maybe some of you are experiencing that. So you're working hard with trying to figure out whether or not you should have your cameras on or not. We'll talk a little bit about that. And yeah, some of the challenges, technology, people talking over one another, unsure whether your message is breaking through. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then of course, everyone's always concerned about how they look and sound on camera. So, okay, that makes sense. So let's move on then to the next topic. What your answers tell us is that it really makes sense because every type of communication that we're having right now, all of our communications opportunity while we're working from home is remote, right? And that is whether we're participating in internal meetings, whether we're delivering a conference presentation like the one we're doing today, if you're giving or you're holding interviews, or you're organizing an important external stakeholder meeting. And Natalie and I were chatting the other day about a big meeting that she just ran where they had like, I don't know, 50, 60 participants all online, and that can be a really challenging thing to coordinate.
That's right. We had 50 plus participants plus an additional 10 panelists that we needed to keep engaged and involved in the conversation throughout the whole meeting. And 3D does this all the time. We host these sort of large, complex, multi-day meetings for our clients that are getting ready for FDA. But changing that type of meeting to a virtual one doesn't really happen overnight. And the reason that it doesn't happen overnight is because being remote adds a whole another layer of challenges to an already complex communications environment. So first, you have technology, which in of itself can be complex. It's easier for your audience to multitask when you don't have them in person. And because they're multitasking, it can be harder to read and engage the audience. Right now, I'm talking to a camera. I can't see any of you. So I don't really know if I'm engaging you or if you're listening, but I'm going to make it very difficult for you to ignore me. It's also challenging to know how to use your voice tone and your body language when you don't have people in front of you.
Yeah, and all of these things make it really difficult to exhibit what we call executive presence, which of course is the topic for our workshop today. So I want to take a step back and just describe to you what exactly we mean by executive presence. So executive presence is a set of learned behaviors that enable you as a speaker to command attention. Now, the really important thing about that phrase is that it's learned behaviors. It's very important to know that it just isn't a concept that somebody either inherently has or inherently doesn't have, but it's actually something that you can acquire and be trained in some really important skills that will help you exhibit this in your meetings and such. And it requires this combination of the two concepts that you see on the slide in front of you that on the one hand can seem to be at odds with one another, but when it comes to executive presence are actually quite complementary. So let me tell you what I mean by that. On the strength side, the people who you're communicating to really need to understand that you are demonstrating that you have the capability to make things happen, like you're in charge. And on the warmth side, your audience needs to feel that you share their intentions and their values. And it's this combination that really enables you to exhibit that kind of executive presence that will command attention and hopefully enable you to achieve not only your communications goals, but your organization and your business goals. So that's what our presentation is focused on for today, your virtual executive presence, and that it requires planning, of course, planning, preparation, and practice. So what you see on the slide here are 8 topics, and really there are 8 tips that we're going to be talking about today. And our message for you here is we don't want you to get overwhelmed. It's a lot of things that we're going to be discussing today, but hopefully we're going to do it at a high enough level that you'll be able to take in the information. And really, if you just find 2, 3 things from our presentation today that really stick with you and you're able to incorporate for your next meeting, that's going to help you make enormous improvements to improving your communication skills. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Natalie. Tip number 1, which is performing a virtual logistics self-check.
Okay. By now, I think we've all had our fair share of online meetings. You could be using Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting, Teams. There's a whole slew of them. And in the beginning, I think there was a little bit more forgiveness if we didn't know how to use the technology exactly. Oh, how do I share something, or am I off mute? But at this point, we all really need to know how to use the technology like a pro. You don't want to be a potato. And let me explain what that means. A potato is the example here from a couple months ago where a director of an organization was leading a meeting and she accidentally enabled the Snapchat camera in her laptop. And Snapchat has a lot of great filters that are really fun, but they're not great for work. And she couldn't figure out how to turn off the camera, so she spent the rest of the meeting as a potato. If I were a potato right now, I don't think that anyone would really take me very seriously. So if it's a very important meeting, you don't want to come off as if you don't know how to use the technology. You don't want anything to sort of undermine your presence and what you're saying. So know how to use the technology. And this includes creating your best camera shot. First, you want to test your background, check to see if there's anything distracting behind you, anything that would take attention away from you as the speaker. Maximize your lighting. Make sure the light source is in front of you, hitting your face rather than behind you, which could create sort of darkness on your face and make it hard to focus on your face. You also need to make sure that your camera is in the right position. I like to have my camera at eye level or higher. Anyone who has ever taken a selfie knows that the best angle for a selfie is from top down. So if your camera is at eye level or higher is best, because that will give you the right position and be the most flattering. If you have your laptop on your desk or on your lap, your camera is actually looking up your nose, and that is not a good look for anyone, not that anyone that I know. Allison and I actually did this with each other before this meeting a couple of times. I just moved, so I haven't done any calls in this office yet. I had her look around, tell me if there was anything strange. Of course, my husband probably passed behind me in the doors as we were checking that. She reminded me to elevate my camera up to eye level, and I did the same for Allison.
Yeah, I'm actually standing because I find that's a good way for me to keep my energy up in presentation. So I really had to move my laptop up. It's actually on a very awkward stool that I'm hoping stays steady through the meeting today.
Awesome, thanks. So here are some additional ways that we recommend avoiding some common technology pitfalls for virtual meetings. The first thing that you want to do is send out invitations that have all of the information included within them, including any information on how to connect to the meeting. So even if you send out the technology and the specifics around the technology ahead of time, you want to ensure that everyone can use the technology in advance. That usually eats up a good portion of the meeting if you're spending time explaining to the attendees on the call how to use the technology. In addition, you want to establish a camera rule up front. So either all cameras are going to be off or all cameras are going to be on. For this call, the panelist cameras are on and the attendee cameras are off, and that was established ahead of time. You want to make sure that you close Outlook or any programs that have a notification, a pop-up, a zing, a vibrate, anything that's going to be distracting, especially if you're the one sharing your screen or if you are off mute. I have plenty of phone calls where I can hear the other person's phone vibrating, vibrating, vibrating the whole time we're on the call. Just want to answer the phone. Also, make sure that you master the mute button. So everyone should be on mute when they're not talking. This helps minimize feedback on the line, but also make sure that you unmute yourself when you go to say something so that we're not spending time while you are talking, but we can't hear you.
Hand gesturing, you're on mute.
Every phone call.
Yeah.
All right. That brings us to tip number 2, which is analyzing the communication opportunity, which Allison's going to take.
Thanks. Yeah, so really the tips here are really quite simple. Before you talk, we want to ask you to think. We're going to ask you to think about 2 things. The first is to identify your communications goals and then to know your audience. So for your goals, before the meeting, we want you to ask yourself, number 1, what am I trying to accomplish in this meeting? And number 2, what is my win for this specific meeting, and then also in the long run? And then once you think about those, you don't have to take a long time to think about it. Just, just pop it in your head, have a chance to mull it over. Then we want you to link your preparation to that goal. And then the second piece of that, once you establish your goal, is to know your audience. Just like we're trying to do in this situation, we talked a lot to Nicole and some of the other board members about the types of people who are members of the society, the issues that you face, the topics that would be most relevant for you. And when we thought about the content for this presentation, we put in some things and we took out some other things so that it would really be relevant to this audience. And for your meetings, you want to do the same thing, because in order to reach your audience, you really need to assess, number 1, what they need to know, number 2, what they want to hear, and number 3, what the biggest barrier is. So if you're in advocacy, for example, and you're trying to persuade a certain audience to think a certain way, you really need to understand that we don't communicate in a vacuum. They're coming to a meeting with their own ideas, and so you need to understand those as you create your messages, that you can overcome them in that meeting. Speaking of creating messages, that's tip number 3, and that's all about the KISS principle. I know you know what this means. It means keep it short and simple. Because, to be honest with you, whether it's in a virtual environment or in the real world when we actually met people in person, we follow the advice of Albert Einstein, who said, if you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it well enough. So simplifying is your job. It's not the audience's job. And we know health policy couldn't be more complicated, particularly now. You think about the patients and providers and the health systems and all the kinds of things that can come to play in a given context, but it's really our job. And most importantly, when it comes to content development, you have to get to the point. And how do we do that? Well, it's 3 things. You have to develop your key messages. You want to know what you want to say proactively. You want to plan for Q&A, to think about the things that are going to be coming towards you so you can be ready to respond. And then again, no matter if it's virtual or in that real world, you only have a limited amount of time, and so you have to use it well. And these preparation techniques are going to help you. Okay, so let me talk to you what I mean about how to develop key messages that will really help you get to the point. So for this, we want you to structure your message in the way that people actually process information. So here's an image of somebody, this woman, she has her phone in her hand, she's scrolling, she's looking at a news feed. And as she's scrolling, there are information that's in her feed that either is going to make her click on a news item or a story or not. So what is it, Natalie? What's drawing her in to be interested in a story or not be interested in a story?
The headline.
Of course, right? It's a headline. We all know that. We know that as consumers, that we need to know what a story is about before we actually want to dive into it. So we want you to follow that same process when you're thinking about how to develop your content. And for that, it's one of our next tools. It's called the 3D message pyramid, and it's all about providing clarity and context as you think about what your key messages are. So it's structured with the headline first, just like that woman who was scrolling through. We want an engaging headline that's going to draw your audience into your story, because it's going to provide a frame and a focus for what you have to say. And then I know you have all kinds of facts and data at your organization, and you're going to need those, not all of them, you're going to need some of them, and decide which ones that you need to actually prove that your headline is true. So the facts and data give you credibility. Next, examples and stories. Examples and stories provide your audience that aha moment. It helps them visualize it. It gives them another way of thinking about the data beyond the data and the facts, but something else that will bring it to life in their brains. And then you want to deliver a bottom line to make them remember it. So as Natalie always reminds me, it's about telling them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that's the secret of the message pyramid that we use in all of our communications, no matter the medium, no matter the topic, no matter the audience. We structure this way because we know this is the way people are wired to listen. Now, that's for the content that you are preparing to say, that you know you want to say, that they're your proactive messages. And then it comes time to prepare for Q&A. So for that, we're going to ask another set of questions.
Okay, you should see the poll launch right now. And this one only has 2 questions. The first one is, how comfortable are you generally in handling Q&A in person? And how is your team handling Q&A in virtual meetings? Are you just allowing people to interject? Are you requiring them to ask questions in the chat feature or use the raise hand feature or something else?
Okay, so it looks like we're getting some answers coming in, which is great. Maybe a couple more seconds here. Yeah, no, this is definitely a topic where people who we work with, those super confident people, end up feeling very unconfident when it comes time for Q&A, but we've got some tools for this one too. Okay, it looks like most people are done. Natalie, do you want to reveal these results?
Let's go.
Okay, cool. So it looks like most people are comfortable. Few people vary, and so across the spectrum there, but most people are living in that comfortable zone. And it sounds like you are making some choices to allow people to interject with comments and questions and stuff through the meeting, which is great. Really, it's just about setting up, as Natalie was saying, setting up those expectations in advance so people know. So let me get back into this. Our big message for you about Q&A is that we don't want you to fear the questions. The questions don't do the damage, only the answers do. So we're going to give you some tips for not only understanding how to really think about and prepare for those questions in advance, but actually, if you're strategic about it, Q&A is another really great opportunity to use that message pyramid to reinforce the things that you wanted to say in a meeting and use them in response to questions. So how do you prepare? We've got a few tips for you on that. The first is spend a couple minutes, again, before the meeting, before your presentation, and write down the 3 questions that you're most likely to get. Maybe you know the answer, maybe you don't, just write down the questions. The second thing is, and we want you to be really honest about this, we want you to identify the 3 questions that you don't want to get. Because the last thing we want is you to look unprepared or to look like you're the deer in the headlights and a question comes at you. We want you to continue to maintain that executive presence and be really confident when those questions are coming in. And then we want you to practice the answers. So what does practice look like? And for that, this is our next tool. It's called the 3D Q&A roadmap. It starts with the challenging question, and you see it ends with your message pyramid. But let's talk how to get there. So the challenging question comes in. So let me define what we mean by challenging question. A challenging question for this group, who is a very smart group, is not necessarily a question that you don't know the answer to. If you very well may know the answer to the question, but your filter should be, is this question and my answer going to help me deliver the messages I need to deliver for this meeting or this presentation? And if it doesn't, you got to answer the question. That's the next step on the roadmap. You got to answer the question, but you can keep it brief. And then once you answer the question, then you can bridge, I'll talk about that in a moment, to help you put your answer in context and then get back to your message. So what is a bridge? A bridge is just a connective phrase, a phrase like the most important thing to remember is, or in fact, or actually, let me put this into some perspective for you, that links the answer to your message. Now notice that all of those arrows on the roadmap, they're all going in one direction because we just want you to go from the challenging question to your message. No need to circle back at the end and ask if you've answered the question or repeat the negative question. If you follow this roadmap, you definitely have. Okay, let me go to the next topic, which is tip number 5. And this is all about managing discussions effectively. And for that, Natalie's going to take over.
So there are many challenges to managing discussions virtually. First, as many of you mentioned in that first poll, there are people talking over each other. Some people talk too much, other people don't talk enough, and inevitably the conversation is going to go off topic. And because of this, you really do need to have a chair or someone leading the meeting, and they need to be able to set the expectations at the very beginning of the meeting. So if you're the person who convened the meeting, you need to state the purpose and the goals of the meeting right up front. Always, always, always have an agenda, even for short meetings. Review the agenda at the beginning and the topics that are going to be discussed so that everyone knows exactly what to expect. Then you want to establish your rules of order. So if there are, let's say, 20 people on the line and everyone needs to say something, maybe you set a time limit for speaking and you designate a timekeeper. That'll keep everyone on track, keep their comments short, and make sure that you end the meeting on time. If you're going to have Q&A or have people make comments, set that up front. Are you going to allow people to just speak when they're called on, or to use the raise hand or the chat feature? So those are a couple things that we mentioned earlier. For this call, we're using the Q&A function within the Zoom platform for questions, and that's going to help keep us on time. No matter what, the chair has to stay in control throughout the whole meeting, so they have to ensure that the rules are being followed. So if someone does go and interrupt someone, they can say, let's have one conversation, please. And if there are people going off topic, they can regain control of the meeting by saying, the purpose of the meeting is X, let's stay on topic. John, you had a comment, let's go to you next. And that really helps focus the conversation and making sure that you come off as the lead and the executive in the room having control of the meeting. And that brings us to the next tip. These are going pretty quick. Tip number 6, create engaging visuals. And that's Allison.
Yes. Okay. So we've talked a lot about this idea that the audiences are virtual and they're working from all kinds of spaces that are not typical workspaces, right? So you're working from a home office, you're working from a kitchen, you're working from a bedroom, and there's all kinds of potentially other people who are living in your space with you. And it's very likely, as actually happened a little bit earlier in this meeting today, that somebody would walk into the room, and you might get distracted, and you might look away from the slide or the conversation for a moment. And the idea that slides should pass the glance test is that when your audience re-engages and they focus back on the slide, you want them to know exactly where you are the moment they re-engage. And here are some rules for that. First, you want to keep those slides simple. One major idea per slide. A lot of people we hear think that they try to gauge how long a presentation is by how many slides they have, and that's just not the case. What dictates how long your presentation is the words that you say. So if in fact you're able to break up a slide into make up a slide that had a lot of topics on it into multiple slides, the only real thing that will happen is that you're going to have a much better chance that your audience will remember what you're saying, because you want more slides with more white space per slide. Research tells us that that's a better way of retaining information. And as you're speaking to the topics on your slide, you want to use bullets and not paragraphs. Second, you want to follow what we call the see-say principle. And that means that the first words that you say on each slide are actually the headline on that slide. Just like what I did on this slide here, I said, follow the see-say principle as soon as I flipped to the slide. The next thing, you want to address the points from the top down. You want your audience following along with you, not reading ahead, but actually tracking what you're saying the moment when you're saying it. You want to address everything on the slide. If Natalie had been talking about something else in the managing discussions effectively section, but there was a piece of information on the slide that she never addressed, your brain as the audience would be processing why she hadn't talked about that thing in the lower right-hand corner, as opposed to listening to all the important information she was delivering at that time. So you want to address everything on the slide, and you want to build your content with an animation tool, again, to keep your audience with you all along the way. Okay, so that's tip number 6 about creating effective slides. Oh, it looks like Nicole has a question.
Yes, thank you, Allison. I think a lot of the tips that you just included in this follow the CSAY method around building slides that are clear and concise certainly hold true with in-person presentations. So I was just wondering, for virtual settings, that seems just as important, maybe even more so because of the additional distractions that people may have. So I guess, is the advice to keep, draw that back even more and make the slides, as short and concise as possible? Or is there, is that much different than what an in-person presentation would look like?
It takes on added significance, I think, in this environment, because you let your guard down a little bit on one slide or two if you're in that in-person meeting. We wouldn't recommend it, but let's say you do. But in this environment that can be so fractured and so many people have so many opportunities to be distracted during the meeting, you really, really want people to be focused on you and what you're saying, and not being distracted by something that you didn't say or not quite being able to follow where you are on the slide. Natalie, do you have something to add?
Yeah, so I wanted to add that it also depends on what your presentation is. So is it a meeting? Are you doing a TED Talk? Is this a briefing for upper management? So the slides work differently in each one of those settings. If this is a briefing for a meeting, usually that deck is a takeaway and people refer back to the charts and the reports afterwards. So in that sense, you want your slides to sort of be a little more dense. If this were a TED Talk, you definitely want your slides to be as simple as possible because you are the focus. Everything that your audience should be engaged with you completely.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Yeah, well, we've been focused a lot on the content, on slides and Q&A and messaging, and now we're going to move to tip number 7, which is one of my favorite tips. It's all about leveraging your voice, tone, and body language. I feel like this is one thing we hear from our clients all the time. I'm excited for Natalie to walk us through this one.
Great, thank you. So I want to start off this tip with talking about a study that was conducted a few years ago, or I think a bunch of years ago at this point, at UCLA, which attempted to understand how messages were processed, how information was being processed. And they found that there were 3 main components to every message. So the actual message, or the content, was one part. The voice tone, or how you say things, was the second part. And then your body language was the third part. And in terms of how people process those 3 parts of the information or the message accounts for only 7% of how people process that. The voice tone, 38%, and your body language accounted for 55% of how that information is being processed. And I think up until this point, we've been talking about how to prepare your content mostly. So it's a little confusing to say, well, it's really all body language. And it's not that your content or your message doesn't matter. It's really that your voice and your body language, so how you say it, are going to either drive that message home, or they're going to be roadblocks into how people receive that message. They're not going to receive it the way you want them to. So really say it like you mean it. And the first part of that is to exhibit positive body language. If you want to improve your executive presence, this is paramount. You need to sit up straight. Even if you're taking calls from your couch, you want to sit up straight. I always just roll my shoulders back and get ready, get in the zone. Make sure that I'm engaged, but always lean a little bit forward. That really gives the warmth to what you're saying and makes you seem fully engaged in what the conversation at hand is. If I were to lean all the way back, I look a little disinterested. As Allison is doing, you could stand up if that's more comfortable or natural for you, but just remember to take your camera up with you if you do stand up. You don't want to sway back and forth or fidget or mess with anything, your feet or your legs under the table or under the desk, because the camera's always on. So whatever you're doing with your hands or your feet, it's going to show on the camera. Instead, what you should be doing is really gesturing in a comfortable way. What I always do is make sure that my hands are on the desk or in my lap and I'm not holding on to anything. I don't have a phone or a pen or a laptop or anything in my hand. They're let go and they're ready for me to use them the way that I would use them naturally in a conversation. You want to be careful to not be too expansive with your gestures, because if you do things that are a little bit weird, it's going to be distracting from what you're saying. And people will be looking at your hands and the weird things that you're doing and not listening to the things that you're saying. So use your hands intentionally. Along with that, I think we all know at this point that the camera can really drain your energy. Sometimes what you think is coming through on camera is really different. It's not, you're not projecting what you actually think you are. So it's actually a very good idea to make a video of yourself and watch it with a friend or a colleague. Let someone see you on video. And that's going to give you the best insight into whether or not you need to sort of boost the energy up for your on-camera meeting or presentation, or if you need to tone it down a little bit.
Sometimes I feel like I have to tone it down. I'll be honest.
My husband agrees that I need to tone it down. This is also a good place while you're watching the video of yourself. It's a good place to look at your appearance and what you're wearing. So it should go without saying, but you should dress like you mean business. You might be working from home where the dress code is bedroom casual every day, you barely get on pants. But if you want to come off more executive and have a more executive presence, especially virtually, you should still dress for the job that you want and not the job that you have. So if you wear makeup to the office, just put a little makeup on for your virtual meeting. If you usually do your hair for meetings or going into the office, do your hair, fix it up, you know, keep it neat and keep it professional. You also want to smile. That helps you avoid the resting blank face. And definitely don't chew any gum or eat anything while you're on camera, especially if you're the one that's off mute and presenting. It's very, very distracting to have someone smacking into a microphone or chewing gum while they're trying to present. Also, when you're watching the video of yourself, listen to your voice. So you want to make sure that your voice is being used intentionally. The same with your appearance. You want to deliver with strength and with clarity, the warmth that Allison was talking about earlier. You want to laugh if it's appropriate to laugh. You don't want to come off as a robot just because we're virtual. Use variety in your pacing and your volume. You can speed it up and get really loud if it makes sense to do that, or you can really slow it down, take your time, and get quiet. So something that we've been doing this whole time on this call is slowing down and taking a brief pause before and after important points. And the reason that we do this is because it helps the audience process the information a little bit better when you give them just a brief pause to take it all in. There are a couple more things that you want to listen for in your voice. So a couple of typical vocal mistakes that you want to listen for are, the first one is upspeak. Upspeak is an inflection at the end of your sentences, and it makes you sound uncertain because everything sounds like a question. I know Allison loves this one.
Well, I think it became very trendy for people to use this to, I don't know, to attempt to not sound as confident in a meeting. And just as the listener, and particularly for somebody who does work with a lot of young professionals who are making their way up in an organization, the last thing you want to do is come off as being uncertain. So as Natalie said a moment ago, you got to say it like you mean it. And if you really believe in something, you want to communicate that with your voice.
That's right. The next one is vocal fry, which is a creaky register. It also can be mixed in with upspeak. So it can also make you sound very uncertain, and it doesn't sound professional at all. You can also speak too softly so that no one can hear you. There are also speed talkers. That's me. I get very excited and I like to be very efficient. So I want to get as much information out as possible. And when I realize that I'm doing that, I just take a brief pause, take a breath, slow back down to my normal pace. Finally, some people, this is also me, I forget to breathe. They hold their breath and it makes them sound strangled or tight. So just take a breath, take your time. There's no real rush. If you have practiced all your information, you should be getting it all out in time. So make sure that you're listening for those are some of the really common ones that you can listen for as you're watching yourself on video.
Yeah. And the other thing we often hear back because when we work with our clients, we put you on a video as you're delivering your presentation or you're practicing for a meeting. We put you on camera, you deliver your talk, and then we play it back and we start and we stop like a master class to really identify a lot of these elements we've been going through in our presentation today. And one of the things that people are always shocked about is filler sounds or phrases that they use so much and they had no idea. And you don't really get this self-awareness until you take the tips that Natalie was just talking about. Record yourself with and everybody is a television reporter, a camera operator these days. You use your phone at any time and just record yourself. And a lot of times you hear these phrases, ums, ahs, you knows, and they're just these filler sounds that are very grating on your audience. And so the first thing that you need to do is, number one, assess how often you use them and why. A lot of times, and actually Natalie and I worked through this in preparing for this presentation, what we found is that earlier in our preparation process, as opposed to when we met just yesterday and doing our final rehearsal, we had a lot of ums and ahs earlier because we were thinking ahead. We were trying to think about what my next line was, what the next slide was, as opposed to really being in the moment with you as the audience. And we were filling those pauses with our thinking sound. And I don't want you thinking, we want you being in the moment. So slowing down, pausing more often is really going to help. And in order to do that, you really do have to raise your level of preparation. And that actually takes us to our last tip, which is tip number 8. And it is all about practice. And we've got one more poll, all about practice, I think. Here we go.
I'm slow on the draw, but I got it.
That's okay.
So there are 2 questions with this one as well. How many times do you rehearse a presentation before an important meeting? So some people usually don't rehearse, or 1 to 3, 4 to 6. And then how do you practice? So do you practice by flipping through the slides and then just talking them through in your head? Do you speak your points out loud? Do you use an audience, even if that audience is just a mirror, your dog, stuffed animals, if you still have those?
Does your stuffed animal give you feedback, Natalie?
Yeah, my stuffed animals
know
everything about me.
Okay, I think that's just about everybody. So why don't you push these results? Oh, wow, push these results out. Great. Okay, so that's good. I mean, practicing is really good. Rehearsing your presentation 1 to 3 times sounds great. 4 to 6 times sounds amazing. 1 time, okay. We'd love to, if you up your level of preparation. It doesn't have to take too much time. The next one is interesting because when the options here, flipping through the slides and reviewing them in your head, is something that I think all of us do. The main challenge with that, because if you're not saying them out loud, is you're not actually hearing how the words are going to sound when you say them out loud to your audience. And very often, even if you've taken some time to write down some talking points for your presentation, we tend to, as a matter of default, we tend to write for the eye instead of writing for the ear. You sort of write for the eye with perhaps the idea that somebody may read a sentence, and then if they didn't quite get it, they could go back to the sentence again and read it from the beginning. But in a presentation, in a live presentation, you don't really have that luxury. And so we really want you to think about a preparation process for practicing that follows best practices. So let me click in here and talked about what that looks like. Everybody knows this expression, right? Practice makes perfect. But what we know from our experience is that practice actually doesn't make perfect. What practice does is it makes something permanent. So what we're going to talk about is how to perfectly practice, because if you perfect practice, that will make you perfect. And then what does that look like? Well, practicing the right way means just what we talked about a moment ago. It means practicing out loud. It means practicing with an audience, maybe once with your stuffed animals, but really you want somebody who can give you some feedback about your slides. Were you on a slide too long? Could you use simpler language that will be easier for your audience to understand? You want to practice recording your voice and playing it back so you can identify some of those vocal challenges that Natalie identified. Are you up speaking? Are you sounding sing-song, like you're sounding like you're delivering a list, which means you're not really interested and it's very ho-hum and you've done it a million times this way? And then, of course, you want to practice yourself on camera and play that back so you can see what that looks like as well. Nicole is back, which I think means she has another question.
Yes, one of our attendees has a great question around practicing. What is a good way to practice giving answers during a Q&A? I know we had many people who felt comfortable, but I imagine this is also something that we can practice to get better at.
Yeah. So I'll start, and then Natalie, why don't you jump in? But the main thing for us is to follow that Q&A roadmap. So to really think about, so when the question comes in, make sure you understand the question. And if in fact it's a question that allows you to deliver one of those messages that you walked into the meeting wanting to deliver, you're in a really good place, right? If the question is way off topic, so then you have to give your audience the respect that they deserve, and you got to answer that question. But then once you do, you want to move along the roadmap and think about, another thing that I want to be sure and mention, or what's really important about the question that you asked is that, and then get back onto the message. And so in terms of practicing for that, it's what Natalie described a moment ago, working with a colleague, working with a friend, and testing out the answers, because very often the first time that you answer a question, it needs some work. Wouldn't you say, Natalie?
It needs a lot of work usually.
Yeah.
I do it with my husband all the time. I do it with my sister, with colleagues at work. Like Allison said earlier, I identify the questions that I think I'm going to get, maybe a couple of strange ones that I think would maybe not get, but would be something I should prepare for. And I give that list to my husband, my sister, whoever it is that I'm rehearsing with. And I let them ask me in role, and then I say it in role. I don't say it like I'm talking to my sister. I say it as if I'm talking to that person that's actually asking that question. And that's the best way to sort of hear yourself. What did I just say? Is that how I wanted to say it? And really criticize how you're giving that response.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that enroll piece, Nicole. And if you think back to that message pyramid, you want to headline your response, give that answer, and then think about the facts, but you just don't want to overwhelm your audience with too many things, and then summarize it. So I love the message pyramid for Q&A.
Yeah, that's another point I wanted to make. The first critique that I always give myself or anyone that I'm practicing with is, did I headline that message? So is the first thing out of my mouth, was it the headline message that I wanted to lead with? And did I follow the rest of the pyramid? So that's a really great point.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. That actually brings us to kind of the conclusion piece. And this is all about these 8 great tips for boosting your virtual executive communications presence.
That's right. And the first tip was to perform a virtual logistics self-check.
Yep. You want to analyze that communications opportunity, kiss your message, and prepare for Q&A.
Then you want to manage discussions effectively once you're actually in the meeting.
And create engaging visuals.
Leverage your voice tone and body language.
Right. And of course, you want to practice.
Practice, practice, practice.
Practice, practice. Absolutely. Even nobody's perfect. And even the people who are really good, and people say, oh, they're just a natural, they're just a very good practicer. So that is the end. We went ahead and put our email addresses on here. And as Nicole said at the beginning, we're happy to package these slides up if they would be helpful to the group and share those with you.
Yes, also find us on LinkedIn. We'd love to link up with you guys if you have any additional questions or anything that we can help you guys with.
That's a really good thing. And I think maybe I'll also plug following 3D Executive Communications, because webinars like this and then other articles that our team is writing, we're constantly posting that stuff. It's all free. It's online. And yeah, I learn from my colleagues like Natalie every day. We're constantly out there experiencing new challenges with our clients and then sharing it back with the group. So yeah, definitely encourage you guys to follow us and be in touch with questions or any other way we can help you.
Great. Thank you both so much. If I know we still have a few minutes left, and there are a few questions that folks have entered into the chat. So I think one question that popped up earlier around the 8 topics to prioritize, or the 8 tips. What is, I guess, out of all of these, which of these topics are the easiest to focus on first, and how should people think about prioritizing? Because it is kind of a lot to, you know, make over the way that we present in virtual settings.
It is. So I'm going to choose my favorite, Natalie, and then you can go. Okay. So for me, it's all about the message. Message. I want you to focus on the message. I want you to really think about that message pyramid and organize yourself before you walk into that meeting to think about what it is that you want to say and why, and then use that structure, because that structure is really going to help bring your audience along with you, starting with facts and data. And believe me, I understand there's a lot of them in this industry, but starting with facts and data, when you're speaking to really smart people, what you're doing is inviting them to process and analyze and come to their own conclusion, right? And what we want our audiences to do when we're in advocacy or we're trying to influence an audience to come to a certain point, you want to say what the bottom line is of that. And the only way you can get there and understand how to deliver that message is to organize it into the message pyramid.
So I will piggyback off of that. Once you feel fully prepared with what you've developed to go in there, the biggest thing is to practice. Practice. I can't say it enough times, to practice. I just actually helped my sister. I talk about my sister so much. I helped her prepare for a presentation she was giving at a new job. It was her first time presenting at her new job, and she wanted to feel ready, and she was putting this event together. And I said, okay, well, let's talk on Monday, let's talk on Wednesday, let's talk on Friday before your meeting, and you can walk me through those slides and present to me. She goes, really? She was like, oh, I think we'll just do it one time, you know, maybe take an hour of your time. But I said, no, let's go through it one time dry, see how it feels. And if it doesn't feel right, then we'll do it again, and we'll do it again, and we'll do it again until it feels right. So practice until you're tired of practicing, and then do it one more time.
Natalie raises a really good point. Over all those different scenarios, today I did a remote coaching session with a researcher who, I mean, he must give talks, you know, 1 talk a month. And it is incredible the eye-opening experience they have when we record them and we play them back and they hear themselves saying the words out loud. And it's just like revolutionary that the work that it requires to get it right, say it like you mean it, make sure the words are exactly what you want to say, because again, your time is limited and you really need to use it well. You got to respect your audience and deliver the goods in the time that you have.
Right, definitely, thank you. Another person is asking, are there specific tools within Zoom that can help with this practice session, or is it just as straightforward as, you know, hitting the record button in kind of a meeting with yourself and then kind of hearing that back?
Yeah, I could take that one, Allison. So Zoom, it is as easy as hitting the record button. I'm not sure what version of Zoom everyone's working off of, but for, I think, the professional version, if you record it to the cloud, it will automatically transcribe what you're saying, and you can go online and watch your video and see your transcription right next to it. And I have found that to be phenomenal. It saves me so much time of writing my own script. I can get on record myself. It'll transcribe what I'm saying, and then I can start editing rather than writing from scratch, which saves a ton of time. So that's one tool within Zoom that I find very helpful.
Thank you. There's two other questions about, well, one is on the virtual platforms and using video. So someone is asking that their organization has been using virtual meetings for years now, but mostly just audio, and has not largely used video for meetings among staff. Will adding video make communications more effective, particularly for meetings where a small team is presenting information to many people? And then what about for meetings among this small group that's more collaborative?
So, and by video, just to clarify, you mean everybody's video feed showing, not that they're like showing a packaged video. Is that, just to clarify the question? I assume that's what they mean.
Yeah, I think they said just audio versus seeing.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
So I think you got to think about the meeting and what the goals of the meeting are. I actually think for that second setting that you described, that's kind of collaborative thing. If it's a team kind of really getting together and they're doing some brainstorming, and you know, we're in a people business. I assume a lot of you are in a people business, and I always think that having a camera on is better than turning it off. But I also know, and actually I'll tell you a little behind the scenes story. There's a slide in the presentation where Natalie was discussing setting the rules for the meeting in advance, okay? And when we said establish a camera rule, they're all on or all off. Well, when we first started doing this presentation, that bullet point on that slide said, turn your cameras on. And it was just a flat rule. There wasn't any flexibility. And then we started reading a lot of the articles that have been coming out about this Zoom fatigue or online meeting fatigue. And it's draining over the course of the day. And if you really are trying to, you know, get the best out of your team, what we sort of landed on that we think is best is just establish that rule up front. So the expectations are set. So that Natalie said, if you wear makeup normally in the audience, no need to waste some good lipstick if you're, not going to have a camera on. But if you are, then right, you want to turn the camera on. And in a more serious way, I just think that's a good rule, and I think it can lead to more engagement because you are able to see people's reactions and try to gauge people's receptivity to your messages.
Yeah, I think the video would also make communications more effective, because if we think back to the slide that I showed about how information is processed, where the majority of information is processed either through the voice or body language. 55% was body language. So if you don't have your camera turned on, you're sort of losing that element of it, and you're relying solely on people to listen to every word you say, which is difficult. So I think that turning cameras on, especially for small meetings, especially because we have so many meetings, I haven't seen my colleagues. I haven't seen Allison. Touch her face. I haven't seen her in so long. So having the cameras on has really been great for our organization, for small meetings, for rehearsals, for internal quick calls, for happy hours. It's just nice to see people's faces regularly.
That is for sure. Well, it looks like we are at time, so I will just close us out. Wanted to say from everyone, thank you so much, Allison and Natalie, for providing your expertise, really showing us how to prepare for virtual communications and to boost our executive presence. And also thank you to everyone who's joined. It's been, this is the first virtual workshop that we've had around professional development. So we hope this was helpful. Please let us know. You will be receiving a follow-up email with the slides and the link to the recording. And please let us know if you have any feedback or thoughts to share, any other questions. And I will also add, next week on July 8th, the Health Society is having our virtual trivia event. So the information to sign up for that is on our website, dchealthpolicy.org, and you'll get an email as a reminder for next week as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and I hope you all learned something from this workshop. I know I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to practicing for my next presentation. So thank you all.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Take good care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.